My name's Claire Newcomb. I'm here with you today for Lisa Horton Crafts. I'm going to be using the brand new collection born out of the collaboration with Tracey Hay. Fabulous collaboration, but Tracey Hay designs with the quality of the Lisa Horton Crafts and you are onto a winner. So today I'm going to be making a shaker card. So you can see the shaker card here. I've used all the elements from Lisa Horton and the Tracey Hay collaboration. I'm using the really lovely A6 stamp set, which is the best fishes. The papers in the collection are fabulous. It's what the quality that we've come to love from Lisa Horton, paired with the designs from Tracey. We have a set of vellum. It's printed vellum. We have 3 designs. There's 4 sheets in each. I will show you each of the designs. I'll just bring in some white paper so you can see them here. So we have lovely ombre designed vellum, and these designs actually in the vellum are also mirrored in the paper that I will come along and show you in a second. So we have 2 designs there, and we also have a 3rd design also. Lovely colours, pastel colours on there, blues and greens, which is absolutely my colour palette. So these have been an absolute joy to work with. We also have the Splash collection papers. We have 10 designs of papers. You have 3 sheets of each of them. You can see each of the designs here. The sheets are A5 in size, a really good weight to work with, lovely to stamp on, lovely to die cut. We have the blue and green bubbles. We also have coloured bubbles with the pinks and yellows introduced. Now we have hearts which have this lovely distressed edge. It's a real folksy type of hearts, but we also have detailing on the inside. Now we have a couple of designs of these, and each of the hearts are different. I'll try to show you them as I go through, just so as you can get an idea of what's going on. So this one has text in the background, some lovely detailing. We have different colours introduced onto this one. Now this one here, same colours, but slightly different variation on the design in the middle, so you can see that in comparison to here. We have a 3rd one again, very similar, slightly more grasses there, and you have more foliage. Then we go on to the designs that are mirrored in the vellum. So you have this one here, and this one with the text and some what looks like stencil work in the background, and the one with bubbles again. So these 3 papers are also mirrored in the vellums. There are papers. We also have a set of acetate. This is the bubble acetate. You get 5 sheets, and it's the beautiful weight quality which we've known to associate with Lisa's acetate. So this is the bubble acetate. If I just bring that closer to the camera for you, you will see that this is actually coloured also. It's so pretty, and you'll really appreciate the colours and the nature of this vellum when you actually get this onto your craft desk to craft with. Now the vellum does come coated on one side, so you will see when I die cut this in a little bit, and it does die cut beautifully, you'll see that there is a protective coat on the other side, which is actually, once you die cut it, it's very easy to remove. So we also have our A6 stamp sets. We have the dies associated with these also. Turn it around there for you, so you can see all the dies, and all of these little details can also be die cut with the very small dies in there too. Even this tiny little hello stamp, there is a die to cut that out. So I'll just show you also the other items from Lisa's collection that I'll be using to go alongside this. I should put this slide up for you so you can see everything that I'm using today. I'm also using the nested flags. Comes in the original packaging because it's one of the very first sets that Lisa brought out to us when she launched the Lisa Horton Crafts brand. But yours will come in the packaging that we're possibly more familiar to you these days, in these lovely storage envelopes. So I'll be using the nested flags. I'm also using the Thank You on the Edge craft stamp and die set. So this will be creating the shaped edge on the side, and I'll be showing you how to use this in a slightly different way, because although this set does shape the edge of your dies, today I haven't done that, and I've just used it just to create a little border, just to have another little design detail on there, just another way to use the sets, makes them more versatile. I'm also using the Lives of Each A6 stamp set because why not? It matches perfectly with the theme of Tracey's collection. So just to introduce some shells, introduce some texture into the card on the form of one of these little tags here. So to create the shaped card, I'm starting off with a square card blank, the size that I would always use, 15 centimetres square, which is just short of 6 inches square. I've cut myself a piece of colour cardstock, colour coordinated, that will sit on the inside of the card. So you cut it to the size of the front of the card, and so it sits on the inside, just very a slither shorter than the width, just to allow for the dimensions of the crease on the inside card. Now to cut the shaped edge here into the side of the card, I just want to cut a very thin slither off the edge of this card blank. So it would probably work out to be just over 1/8 of an inch or 3 or 4 millimetres. Very slim, and you'll see why in a second. So I'm just going to slice that off. So you will see now, when I close this, there is actually a difference in the edge, and that slither that came off was very thin. So I'm going to bring in the edge die, this one here. This set comes with 3 dies. You have the die that cuts out the larger stamped wording here, thank you. You have a die that allows you to cut a mat and layer for that, and you have the 3rd die which allows you to shape the edge of the card. So I shall line up the edge die, so the top of the wording is right along that edge, the front edge of the card blank, and I'm just going to just quickly stick that in place. So just line it up by eye so it's along straight along the edge there, and I'm just going to die cut that. So you can see now that we have that shaped edge, and if we were to line the inside of the card there, we have that shaped edge that we can now stamp our greeting onto, or we can stamp the greeting onto a separate piece of card and die cut that out and add that to the side of the card like so. But what I'm going to do today is going to stamp directly on here, and I'm going to reuse this piece that I've die cut off. So normally you wouldn't keep this piece, but today I'm going to, and I'm just going to remove that masking tape gently. Now I'm using a piece of textured cardstock that's going to go into the middle, and the textured cardstock is facing into the card. So when we open the card up, the recipient gets the beauty of the texture there. So facing you, the coloured piece of card, the plain side upwards. I'm going to turn this die cut piece over, and I'm just going to add glue, and I'm going to attach that to this side of the coloured card. So normally you wouldn't keep this piece, But what I'm going to do today is use this so we keep the square card blank shape intact for the card front. And I'm just going to create a little coloured border around the outside. I want the greeting to be there today, but I want it to really sort of blend into the card. And just creating a little coloured border around that, using this piece that you would otherwise discard, just does that beautifully. So I'm just going to line that up with the edge there. And you'll see now why I needed to slice off the edge of this card here. Because what we want to do, we need to line this up with the back of the card. And you can see now that we have a nice little border that will surround our sentiment on the side of the card there. So I need to attach the blue piece. So I'm going to add glue around our die cut there into the front. And we'll just line this up with the back of the card so we know that it's the clearance from the creases there, so it's not going to affect how the card closes. And I'm just going to close that in like so. So we've kept the square shape to the front of the card blank, okay, but we can still see the beauty of the shaped edge there. Now, as I said, if you wanted to add the sentiment to the side by stamping it and die cutting it onto a separate piece of cardstock and then gluing that on, then that is a really good way to go. I'm going to stamp straight onto the card blank. I'm just going to get my Ultimate One out. Now I'm using this because I want the stamping platform. So I'm just going to open the card out a little bit. I'm going to attach that down with the magnet so that doesn't move anywhere. Now what we need to do, we need to take our stamps. Now the thank you, this sentiment in particular comes off in 2 stamps. Okay, so if we wanted to, we could just use this sentiment on its own and stamp it onto any card. But what you will notice is that the die that we have to die cut it is 1. So to make sure that we stamp this correctly so that we are able to die cut it, what you can do, take your die, the cutting edge down so it would actually read in the right way to you. Then all we need to do is just line up our stamps on top of our die. Okay? Now this is quite easy to do. Excuse my head in the way, just a second. I'm just going to line that up so that I know that I can die cut that and it's going to look fine. Now what I would suggest when you get these stamps for the first time, if you haven't already used them, peel, particularly these ones because you'll be die cutting them, peel these off of the backing card. It will take a little bit of effort, but do it, be patient and do it slowly and gently. The stamp will stretch just slightly, but what you need to do is then just sit the stamp somewhere, possibly even for a day. Just sit it back on top and that will just allow the polymer just to relax back into the shape that it was. And that will mean that you'll be able to die cut this and everything will line up beautifully for you. So just allow that to relax. I've used my stamps a few times now, and you only really need to allow it to relax for once, because when you replace this back on, it won't stick as tight as it does the very first time after manufacture. So now we have these stamps lined up on the die, keep them as they are. We just slide this into place because the die will follow exactly where you die cut the edge of the card there. So keeping the stamps on the die, slide the die into place and you close your stamping platform over the top and that will pick up the stamps. Now at this stage you can move the die because you know that everything is lined up. So I'm going to stamp that sentiment with Lisa's Premium Pigment ink. I'm using Tranquil Waters. This is a brilliant ink for stamping in particular because it gets all the fine detail. And you can tell the difference between these and the normal blending inks because these are in a white case. So So I'm going to ink my stamp. Now this may take a couple of stamps just to make sure I get a really lovely impression. So I'm going to stamp that down just the once, and I shall stamp that again just to make sure I can get the intensity of that beautiful Tranquil Waters blue. So that's stamped lovely. Now before I move anything, I'm going to come in with this pigment ink again, but the cobblestones, because I want to make this two-tone. Now what I want to do, I just want to bring the ink pad, but keep it at an angle, and ink just along the bottom of the stamp. You just swipe that up a little bit and you just catch the bottom of all those letters. And if you see, if I hold this up, I'm keeping my ink pad at an angle so I can just catch the base of the letters like that. So when I stamp this down and stamp that, you will see in a second, and it will take a couple of times to do this. And don't be frightened to go in perhaps 2-3 times. And it will just catch the edge, and it will just give us the ombre colour on the wording. So the base of those words would be just a little bit darker than the rest of it. It just adds a little bit of interest to your stamping. Not essential, but it's a really nice technique if you want to give that a go. Okay. So now we've done that stamping, I can remove that from there. And I'll just show you that the bottom of the words are just slightly grayer than the rest of it. It just gives a really nice quality, really nice finish to your stamp on your card there. So that's our card base prepared. Just keep that to one side. So next we need to cut the elements to start building the card, and for this I need to use the nested flags. So I'm going to use the largest die to cut myself a piece of vellum that will sit across the centre of the card. Now we need to create the elements for the shaker card, and I've used a couple of Tracey's papers for this. And I've used a couple of different size dies. So it's entirely up to you. It depends on the size of the card that you're making. So I've chosen this size die to cut a solid piece of design paper. And I've taken a different paper. You can use the same. It really doesn't matter. So this is all your choice. I've used the same size again because these will layer on top of each other. But to cut this aperture or the window, which will show you the shaker pieces within the element, I've used a second die, but I've actually gone 2 sizes smaller. And what that will do, it will give you enough width on the frame to start placing your foam pads. If you used a die that was just 1 size smaller, that frame, as you see sitting here, that frame will be a little bit too thin, and it's unless you have a really slim foam tape that will fit along that, you might struggle to put some of your foam pieces on. But the foam pieces I have are a little bit wider, so which is why I needed to go just 2 sizes smaller, and that gives me still a nice window and enough of a frame to add my foam pieces. So while I still have this particular die out, I also want to use this die to cut a piece of acetate which will fit within the window to contain all our shaker elements. And let me just bring in a piece of paper now. You will see that now that I've die cut this piece of acetate here, that there is indeed a protective film on the reverse of that which we can remove. Okay, you see? There we are. We can take that off, and once that's removed, you'll get the you'll be able to see the beautiful clarity of that acetate. So while I have that acetate with me, I'm going to layer this behind my aperture nested flag there, and I can layer these two together with glue, Lisa's glue. works perfectly to bond the acetate and the paper together. So do that first, just to make sure you give that some time to dry and set. And because we've used the same nested flag die for that, they fit together perfectly. So now we have the aperture enclosed with the acetate. Now we can turn that over and we can see where we can add our foam pads. Now I'm using square foam pads, which are all individual on a roll, and all I do to make them usable, I just take a pair of scissors and I just cut them. In half, like that, which makes them the perfect size to add to my frame, and it still keeps them on the roll. Now, when we are creating a shaker frame, we want to add our foam pads in a continuous frame all the way around the outside, because we don't want any of the shaker elements to escape. Now, if you have foam on a roll, then obviously this is a little bit easier, but still doable if you have them as individual pieces, because all you need to do is just that when you add your foam, you want to make sure that anytime you change direction or use a new section, you want to really squish those ends of those foams together. Let's say we don't want any shaker elements escaping, particularly if you're using a finer shaker element, like I'll be using Lisa's mermaid tails. If you're using sequins or something with slightly larger elements in them, then obviously the gap isn't quite so critical. But because these foam pads are very flexible, you can put them together really quite closely and really make sure that you get that sealed edge. So I'm just taking off the individual foam pad covers at this stage, which leaves them on that continuous roll. I find it's a really nice way to use these, and we can just create that foam pad frame all around the outside of the acetate. It doesn't take too long at all. Really make sure that when you need to make that new connection, that you really put those foam pads close together. Take off all of those. This is probably the most fiddliest part of the whole process, but well worth doing. So, new connection, really make sure that those foam pads are really close together. Then when we come to the end, you can either cut the foam or make sure that that join is just as close and sits flush with each other. So we have our foam frame attached. Now, before we add our shaker elements, it's worth using an anti-static pad and just give the inside of that acetate a little brush. You don't need to use too much, and because you don't want to cloud the front of the acetate there. If you find you've used a little bit too much, you can just tap that out or use a little brush just to disperse that extra anti-static dust that's in there. So before you remove the foam pads, it's always worth adding your shaker elements first, because if something spills and you end up with either glitter or elements on your foam pads, then it will affect the way that it sticks, and sort of, again, you risk losing some of the elements, the shaker elements, from your window. So I've added some of Lisa's mermaid tails. Now these are actually just perfect, aren't they? With the name of this brand new collection, this the Splash collection, I couldn't not use mermaid tails, and they're so pretty. But as I say, you can use any form of element that go inside. If you look at the stamp collection here, we've got some lovely little elements. Even the hello would be worth stamping and die cutting and adding to the shaker element, the bubbles, the hearts, or the fish. Have a bit of fun with this. Everybody loves a shaker card, and they always wonder how it's made. And it's always lovely to see what's added to the centre. So I couldn't not use mermaid tails, and the long-term fans out there, you'll possibly have your own collection of mermaid tails, and this is a lovely way to use them. So I'm just removing the backing from the foam pads. Make sure I've removed it all. Like so. Just being very careful I don't spill the contents. Now we take our other nested flag, the one that we've kept intact, and we use this as the backing. So we've created an element. Our shaker element is a standalone piece. And I find it's much easier to create shaker cards this way as opposed to putting them directly onto the card. So now that the backing is on there, we have a complete shaker element, and you can now see those elements moving on the inside. They're not sticking too much to the front of the acetate, so you can see the design paper through the back too. So now we can start putting our card together. Now if we look at the elements here, I've also got a little tag here which I've embossed. Now I don't know about you, but when I'm using design paper like this, I like to be really frugal and use as much as I can, because it's such a shame to waste these beautiful designs. So from the window that I've die cut this frame from here, okay, see, I'm actually going to emboss this and use it as an element, because as I say, it's just too good to throw away. You can save it for another card. I'm going to use it on this one. So I'm taking the embossing folder, Life's a Beach A6 embossing folder. Again, it's full of shells, and because we are embossing a piece that's smaller, we can really cherry pick which part of the design we want to use. So there's some amazing detail on these little snail shells here, the larger shells. So I'm going to make sure that I pick out all of those, and I'm just going to run this through the die cutting machine. So, and I think it's really nice to emboss design paper. Although there's a background design, with Tracey's ones, it's always so subtle, and I think you can actually enhance these design papers by adding these details onto them, and particularly when it's so themed like this, that is just looks so pretty. And I love this green, the seafoam green. So I think now we can start assembling the card before we get on to stamping our lovely little characters. Now this vellum frame is going to sit in the centre of the card there, and I'm going to attach this with red liner tape. Now we have a section that is overlapping, which if you wanted to, you can cut off. But I think sometimes it's nice just to fold it around the back of the card, particularly if you stamp the back of the card with a little handmade by stamp and add your name. I think it's nice just to know that you can add a little bit of detail to the back of the card also. So I've had some liner tape like that. I'm just going to add this onto here. I'm going to put the shaker element on just to place it so I can see where I can invisibly attach the vellum to the card. So I'm going to leave the frame on there, turn that over, centre it a little, and I can see that behind this shaker element is where the tape will not be seen. So I'm going to add my red liner tape there. So I know it's the bane of everybody's life, attaching vellum to a card blank and not letting it be seen. So always hide it behind the elements you're piling on top. So you can see that that will work perfectly there. So I'm going to firstly attach the reverse of the vellum. So I'm going to take the cover off the tape there. I'm going to line this up, and I know that that section will overlap the back of the card. Centre it, turn it around, and just fold that over the back of the card. And if you wanted to, you could always fold it first before sticking it down, or add a little score line just to help out. So now we can see that we take off the cover from the liner tape here. And that will fold perfectly into place onto the front of your card. And we can attach our shaker element and our little embossed piece underneath. And I'm going to do that now. I'm going to firstly add the glue to the shaker piece, then the glue to the back of the embossed piece and put them down together, because when I add the embossed piece, I'm quite particular in where I want that place. I don't want it coming past this shaped area of the vellum. So I'm going to keep that there. And I know that if I put my shaker element on the front there, everything layers beautifully and you can still see all the detail of the embossing. So I'm going to leave that aside just to dry and create my little characters. Now, when it comes to stamping, people can be a little bit hesitant to stamp because they don't always know how to colour the images. So today I'll show you that you don't necessarily need to worry about that. Use the design papers. So I'm going to take one of Tracey's papers, these ones with the bubbles. You can use the coloured one. The colours on this one works for me. And whether it's by chance or by design, I like to think it was by design, that we can stamp. Where's the elements? Where's my little stamps gone? There we are. That we can take our characters and stamp these directly into the bubbles. Now these bubbles have got shading on them already, so we can literally stamp our little characters onto there, die cut them, and they're already cut for you. So if you are a little bit hesitant to colour, why not stamp onto a design paper or a piece of coloured cardstock, use it onto the blue, the same colour as we added to the inside of the card, and away you go. So there's always a way, so you never any need to be frightened of stamping. So because these are so small, I'm going to use these stamps on an acrylic block. I'm just using a black ink pad. That's my choice, just to make this really stand out. So I'm going to ink that, and I always take the ink pad to the stamp to make sure that I can see I've got a really good coverage. And then you choose which area you want to stamp onto. So I'm going to make sure I stamp within the bubbles. Okay, make sure the ink ticks. We have our lovely little character that is already coloured for you. So I'm going to stamp two. I'm going to take this other little character, ink him up. I'm going to choose this bubble next to him, just here, and stamp him there too. And how gorgeous are they? They're lovely little characters. Now, as I say, we do have the dies for these as well, which is perfect. So I'm just going to just roughly cut those out. And this is going to give me the opportunity to die cut these. Now, because these are such small little stamps, I love using stamps this size, so I can have my little portable die cutting machine. And I'm going to be able to choose my dies, line those up. I should be able to do the two of these together. You can tape them if you want, just to make sure they stay in place. But I think I'll be able to die cut the two together. And it's not until you die cut them actually and taken away the excess that you realise the beauty of stamping onto a coloured paper already, that you've got that wonderful shade in there that you really don't need to worry about colouring if you don't want to. Now, if you do, and you're feeling a little bit brave, or you've just got yourself easing yourself into colouring, you can always take either some alcohol markers or coloured pencils, and these are the ones that Lisa had a good while ago, so you may have these in your stash. And you can just use perhaps a grey just to go around and add a tiny little bit of shading. You really don't need to add very much at all, but what you will notice, it can just sort of enhance your image. And that is all you're adding. You see, just around the outside. And that can be just enough to add some shading. So if I bring this character in here, who's had nothing done to it, and just by adding just a little bit more, just around one side, you can start seeing you can so easily enhance your characters without really colouring. Just go in really lightly with a pencil and you can add that extra shading. You can add a little back character by adding little pink to the cheeks, just around the outside. Again, just really lightly. You don't need to come in heavy at all. Okay, and if I go on to this one, you can perhaps even add some colour. Use some green and just enhance the colour that is there already. Okay, this I wouldn't say is necessarily colouring. You're just adding just a tiny little accent around the outside, and that can be just enough for one to give you the confidence that you are adding extra colour without colouring the whole image. Just go around the edges, and I'll add perhaps a little bit of blue. Just into the fins maybe. Just add a little bit of shade. Just enhance those images. You really don't need to add very much at all. Now perhaps add a little bit of pink as well to his cheeks. They are just such cute images, aren't they? But work with your design papers that you've stamped onto. And if I hold that up for you now, so I can pick those up. So those are the two that have had some colour, and I'll just add the one on the end that hasn't. You can just see the difference that that tiny little bit of colour has made, and you can grow your confidence in colouring and stamping that way. So we've got those images now, and they all look lovely. We can attach those directly onto our frame. This one I will glue straight onto. You can sit on the frame there. This one I want to put on a little bit prouder, so he sits a little bit higher. So I'm going to bring some foam pads in, some larger ones this time round. And I'm actually going to put 2 foam pads on. So I'm going to put foam pads on just at the back here. Take the backing off that one. And because it needs to stand proud of the shaker element, which is already 3D'd onto the card, I'm going to put 2 foam pads on. So I'm going to double up on the foam pads, which means it will come up twice as high. You could put 3 on if you want, and it's always a really nice technique to remember that you can have double thickness with your foam pads just to get lots of dimension onto your card. And I'm going to have him sitting just there. So he sits a little prouder from his little friend underneath also. So to add just a little bit more detail to the front here, and I'm going to add a bit of black detail, which will just make the rest of everything pop and tie it all together. I'm going to use another sheet of the bubbles here, and I'm going to stamp one of the smaller elements. So I'm going to use the little fish that are sitting there, and I'm going to stamp these in black because I think it will just, you need a little bit black just to sort of lift everything. So I've the stamps on a little acrylic block. Again, take the ink pad to the stamp. That way you can see whether you're getting a really nice coverage. I'm going to again stamp this into one of the bubbles because there will be a little bit of clearance when you die cut this, and you want that little bit of colour just around the edge of what you've stamped, just to tie it in with everything else. And I shall use one of the small dies here that will die cut these fish. So I will just snip that out like so. Again, you can use your little portable die cutter machine and just layer the die over your stamped image. Again, you're going to have a little bit of clearance, and I think the beauty of what Lisa and Tracey do with their stamped and die cutting images, that they get the die to cut as close to the image as possible. I'm not necessarily a fan of having too much clearance between the image and the edge of the die. So between them, Lisa and Tracey get that just right. And it's always worth stamping onto a different coloured piece of cardstock as opposed to white, just so the whole thing blends. So you can see there we have those little accents, which I think just finishes the card perfectly. Now what I will do is find myself a little foam pad that I can pop behind those fish. Now this is pure card making. Again, I've not done any stenciling. It's very different to how I make the rest of my Lisa Horton cards, which I absolutely love. It's really nice to go back to sort of this placing lots of elements onto a card. It's how we all start card making, I think, and it's so lovely to go back to that, especially when you've got such a beautifully themed collection to work with. So this is such a lovely collection to start using all those little extra bits that we've managed to collect over the years also. And do you remember those glass domes that Lisa brought out to us a good while ago? This is such a lovely collection to use those with. And I'm just looking for my little pokey tool, which, look, doesn't that just match the rest of the colour theme perfectly? I have a pink pokey tool also, which works. But we might as well go for one that's colour themed, hey? Does anybody else do that? But it just makes me happy. It really does. And it just brings the joy to crafting, I think. So I'm going to choose 3 of these little domes. They come in different sizes, actually. So let me just pick out the couple of different sizes from there. So I can use my pokey tool now to add them to the design. And this will just finish it off, so we can add these glass domes. Actually, if you have them, they actually come alive with the colours that are around them, so they're so pretty. So I've added my little bits of glue, and Lisa's glue, the tacky glue, is perfect to use with any of these type of embellishments. Also, once it's dried, it holds any embellishment on strong. So you can see now how that card has come together. That shaker element, really dimensional. It shows off the beauty of Tracey's collections perfectly. So we've used the Best Fishes Stamps collection. We've used the printed vellum, the bubble acetate, and the paper designs also. So that just shows, and I've given you a different way to use the edger dies, which I think is always useful if you've had them sitting there. It's really nice to sort of reinvent and use your stash in different ways. So I just leave those like that. I shall add up this little slide for you here just to remind you of the things that I've used. So thanks so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you give it a go, and I shall see you again next time. Take care, everyone.